Hey everyone, and welcome back to Movies to Be Murdered By. This is Jeff Watson, your host, and today this is a special treat. I have a friend with me today. We're going to talk about one of the films in the Nightmare on Elm Street series. Her name is Jessie Drew, and she's also a contributing writer for Movie John. Jessie, how are you today?
Hi, Jeff. Good. How are you?
I'm doing well, and I want to say thank you for joining me and all of your support thus far as we've gotten this podcast off the ground. I really do appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. I'm so happy to be here talking with you, talking things movies. And absolutely, it's important that we all support each other in the this little underground movie circuit that we have going on. So I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. So we're gonna jump right into it. And when I reached out to you, I said, look, I want you to discuss a film that's important to you. If you could, for our listeners, tell everyone the movie that you picked and why.
Okay. I chose Nightmare on Elm Street Part 4, The Dream Master, out of the Nightmare on Elm Street series, featuring the one and only, much beloved, much reviled Freddy Krueger. And I chose this movie. This movie has a special place in my heart. It was very likely the first horror movie that I saw as a child in the 80s. Pretty sure that I went to go see this in the theater with my sister and all the kids in our neighborhood. And we were lucky enough to have a movie theater like right down the street from where we lived. And pretty sure we went to go see this there. The movie came out in 1988, so I would have been about 8 years old and way too young to be watching any of these types of movies. But
And
hey,
back when they didn't make you you didn't have to be 18 to go into an R-rated movie or have someone. Yeah, I'm right there with
right. It was just a bunch of kids. Correct. So I think that was like a pretty common thing in the 80s where I don't know what all of our parents, like this generation's parents, were doing, but we all watched movies that were inappropriate. So, but yeah, the other reason I chose this movie, and I think one of the reasons I love this movie so much was, Freddy exists in this realm of dreams, a space that, I was small, so I'm at that time I was not aware of film history or cinema history, but this space that to me was like, wow, he's attacking these kids, these teenagers in this extremely vulnerable state that you cannot help but go to. Every human being needs to sleep. And so they try to fight it, but they can't ultimately. And everybody ends up succumbing to their sleep and then succumbing to a confrontation with Freddy in these movies. So there was something really powerful about that. And the character of Alice, I have always thought about her. Like throughout the years, I'll think about her battle with Freddy, about how she had to take the mantle from her friends, her brother, everyone in her life that she cared about who died and left her their powers. And you'll get to that when we synopsize the movie. But she just is a really powerful girl hero in a film. And it didn't matter to me that it was horror or not horror. She was just a girl hero in a film, and to a little girl, that was a really big deal to see them on screen.
Awesome. Yeah, it's honestly the first, and like we were talking before, this one I had to really think about. I remember the first three very well, and I wasn't sure why I didn't really remember this one as much. But once I went back and watched it, I realized that there's a reason why I didn't want to remember this one as much, because there are some different scenes that, in previous films, yes, there were some gory and kind of crazy kills in those, but this one has quite a few of those moments that in terms of my personal feeling, that felt a little bit different than the first three films. Is that something that you would agree with?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard and I've read, well, I should say I've read a lot about how this film, was just, it was markedly different from the first three in terms of, at this point, New Line knew that they had like a real franchise, and they knew that they needed to keep, like, after the third one, they were like, all right, we need to like ramp it up and get the next one out because we have something on our hands, a bit of a runaway train, and we need to get it out there. They brought on new writers, and they had struggled with, getting a director. They ended up with Rennie Harlan, who was like, very, very new director. And they had like intentionally made this more of like an MTV. They call it like the MTV Nightmare on Elm Street, because they focused a lot on the soundtrack. Freddie had all of these like, punchy one-liners. He says at one point, like, reach out and touch someone. He's telling Kristen to call in one of her friends, and he's making a reference to that old, AT&T ad, reach out and touch someone. And, these kind of like punchy one-liners. And that's sort of when for some people, that's when the franchise jumped the shark, to throw in that old expression. And then for some people, like myself, being a young child, I hadn't seen the first three, this was my introduction to Freddie. And it made a lot of sense to my very young mind, because I was an MTV generation, child. So the things like the soundtrack, these pop culture references in his one-liners, and the fact that it was maybe, like you said, like less, like maybe less gory, less sort of like just dark violence, and kind of more like these, poppy scenes. Maybe that's kind of was, it was like that, and it appealed to, younger MTV type Prime's generation audiences.
Yeah.
So I can definitely see that, because the storyline is not as like rooted as the first three are.
Yeah, and to kind of go back to what I said, I still think that this is a great film. But, and I'm sure that you'll get to this when we start talking about the movie a little more in depth, but some of the kills in this movie terrified me greatly.
Oh,
and
yeah, absolutely.
and it's funny because the first three movies, I mean, there are some very iconic death scenes in those, and those scared me too. But I think in this one, I think there was more realness, more of a reality to a couple of them, where it's like, not necessarily because Freddie was there, but the notion of, and I'll just go ahead and give it away since we talked about it earlier, the notion of having the breath taken out of you and not being able to breathe. And the symbolism that came with that is that one scene has stuck with me throughout the years. And so that's one of the reasons why I was like, I kind of didn't go back and watch it right away after my first couple viewings of it when I was younger. But, going back and doing research for this episode, I was like, okay, yeah, this is the movie that I stayed away from all those years. And that would be the reason why. And honestly, the good horror films, the good movies, they have those scenes that really stick with you, whether it's a positive or a negative, that you can always go back to. So I enjoyed going back and watching it this time, though. So it was really good.
No, I'm glad to hear that, because the movie is. I'm glad to hear that you enjoyed yourself, and yeah, I agree. There are some really disturbing kills in this movie, and the bug, the Roach Hotel. Yeah. I'm sure we'll get there, but that's another one that a lot of people remember. And it's it's an interesting movie in that it goes to, their worst fears, right? I
Right.
mean, just, and I'm going to kind of, I'm not going to, I won't keep referencing the first three just because we could talk forever. I feel like we could
Yeah.
talk forever about like the first three and then the fourth, but like, in this one, they go right to the heart of everyone's fear, with and spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't seen the movie, I'm going to talk a little bit about this, about their deaths. But for instance, Alice's brother Rick, is very much into his karate. That's a big
Yep.
part of who he is. And you know that's living in this like traumatic and dysfunctional household that him and Alice live in with their alcoholic father, who's verbally abusive to them. Like, I always imagine that that's like a way that he managed for himself to feel safe and to feel like he could defend himself. And then in the movie, that's exactly how he dies. Like Freddy, bests him, at the karate, and and he dies, and that's like taking all of his worst fears, right, and distilling them right into the kill. And he does that. That is one thing that they allow Freddy to do in this movie. They allow him to really get to the heart of each of their fears and just totally exploit them and then kill them based on it. But
Right.
I agree with you about the the sort of I think that's where I would say the realness of the movie goes to.
Right. Right. Yeah. It's something where, you look at all of us have fears, and, it just makes you think, if someone took my deepest, darkest fear and used that, you know, it just, it gives you an uneasy feeling. So if you don't mind, I'd love to have you just kind of give a synopsis of the film and just talk about some of those different scenes that kind of stood out to you, some of your favorite characters, and some of that. So I'll just kind of turn it over to you if that's okay.
Oh yeah, sure. So Nightmare on Elm Street 4 picks up where obviously the third one left off with Kristen. We get a sense of Kristen, her boyfriend Rick, her boyfriend Rick's sister Alice. They're like the main characters to start, and their group of friends in high school. Basically a group of easygoing kids with very distinct personalities who all really get along, which is it's a very nice scenario that they paint at the beginning of the movie of these kids who are very supportive of each other, despite on the surface seeming very different. We get the introduction to right away pretty much to the nightmare situation. Kristen has called in Joey and Kincaid, two of her buddies from the previous film who were left alive with her, and her gift is to call people into her dreams to help her. So they have a little tete-a-tete at the beginning, telling her like, hey, we don't want you to call us into your dreams anymore. And by the way, you keep you kind of stirring the pot, and you don't know that Freddy's going to come back. So just chill out. Don't do that anymore. So she's getting kind of edgy. And then basically her mom feels that she's being drawn again to all of the things which had her in the hospital to begin with. Her mom sees her and her friends at Freddy Krueger's house. So that night, her mom at dinner had put sleeping pills in Kristen's drink, and Kristen basically screams at her and says, "You just murdered me, Mom," knowing that she won't be able to help but fall asleep. And basically, as she says, Freddy murders her. Alice, Rick's sister, has this sort of feeling, this very strong feeling that Kristen's in trouble. She has been pulled into Kristen's dream. She sees her and Freddy. She wakes up in real life, so to speak, and has a photograph of Kristen and Freddy. It says "Greetings from Hell," which then immediately burns up. Alice tells Rick They run to Kristen's house. Kristen's house is on fire and Kristen's dead. So that kind of kicks off Freddy's real return into this new group of friends, where he used Kristen's powers to draw in her friends who were not part of the original group of kids of the parents who had killed him. So the movie continues on where Freddy basically plucks each friend off one by one, as we spoke earlier, using and getting to their deepest fears. They have a friend who you spoke about earlier, who has asthma, and she falls prey to Freddy in a dream in the classroom where he comes and literally sucks the breath out of her. She wakes up and has a massive asthma attack and dies. Alice's brother Rick dies in a battle with an invisible Freddy, which is kind of interesting, and there's reasons for that. I read upon Rick, Alice's brother, was originally supposed to have this sort of very outlandish death in the elevator. There's a scene where he is in an elevator while he's dreaming, and the elevator's kind of going off the rails. He can't control what floor it's supposed to stop on. It's going lightning speed. And I'm not exactly sure what the death was supposed to be, but it was supposed to be sort of like a very like, lavish death in this elevator scene, but the production ran out of money. So
Okay.
they had to improvise. Yeah, so they had to improvise, and they came up with Rick fighting an invisible Freddy, Invisible Man style, in this karate battle, in which Freddy ultimately bests him. He dies, and with each of these deaths, Alice, who was at the beginning shown to be very mousy, for lack of a better word, very shy, couldn't stand up for herself. Her and Rick have this alcoholic, verbally abusive and narcissistic father, who just is horrible, basically. And he's just a mean drunk, basically. And he treats them horribly, and she can never stand up to him. Rick is always the one who stands up to him. As a coping mechanism, Alice always had her daydreams. She would, dream of, like, if her father was being awful to her, she would dissolve into a daydream where she is getting some sort of revenge on him or standing up for herself in a violent way, but she could never do that in real life, And her brother was trying to teach her how to stand up for herself, which I think was a really, really sweet scene. Before he dies. And after he dies, she has another daydream at his funeral where he actually comes out of the coffin, not gory, but just whole, like how he was when he was alive, and is goofing around with her and saying, "Oh no, I'm still alive," and she tells herself, like, no more daydreams, no more daydreams. Like, she's finally kind of maturing and understanding that all of these horrible things are happening, but she can stand up to it. And she's got to put her daydreams away and actually stand up to what's going on and face it. So at that point, she decides, along with the two remaining friends, that they've got to, take on Freddy, and that they're going to meet and at her friend's house, and they're going to take on Freddy and really, kind of like kick his butt. But for lots of other reasons, that doesn't happen, and Alice ends up having to face Freddy by herself. So she begins to suit up, which is also a really sweet scene. I mean, the music in the scene, not so great. Unfortunately, it kind of comes across as corny. But if you could turn off if you could mute and just watch what is going on, or just distill like the action that's going on. She is suiting up. She's taking off all the photographs on her mirror. Her bedroom mirror was just littered with photographs of all of her friends, of her brother. And one by one, as they passed away, she would take off another photograph and begin to see herself in the mirror. which I thought was really beautiful imagery and really sort of empowering for a teenage girl. You know, she's starting to find out like what she's made of, who she is.
So Alice, you know, after she clears all of the pictures off the mirror, takes a bunch of sleeping pills. She downs a bunch of them, and in an effort to get into the dream state where she can finally take on Freddie, and with the intention of finally just ending this. And I just wanted to point out, it's just really, I mean, this scene, music aside, because the music in the scene is, in my opinion, pretty terrible, but it's a really touching scene, and it really goes to the heart of one of my sort of like ideas about this movie. What makes it special is we really get to see this character, Alice, who has been sort of traumatized multiple times. I mean, even before her brother and her best friends all perish. Her mother, it's told in the beginning that, you know, her mother has passed away. You could see it through photographs that she looks at. Her father, as we discussed, is a raging alcoholic who emotionally and verbally abuses her and her brother Rick. So much so that Alice is really like a pushover character. She is only really free to stand up for herself in her daydreams. So, you know, and you see this, you know, a few times throughout the movie. The most obvious time is when she daydreams that she stands up to her father, who has been chastising her for simply making him a salad for dinner, and she takes the bowl and smashes it on the table and yells at him for, you know, being an alcoholic. At some point in the movie, Rick, her brother, tries to tell her that she's got to stand up for herself and speak her mind out loud. He attempts to show her some karate moves, which ends, you know, on sort of like a giggle fest between the two of them. It's a very sweet moment. But I always liked this movie because of the transformation that you see her make. And again, you know, after like all of these beloved people in her life die, and she begins to take on their special qualities to make her a stronger person, she's finally able to sort of like blend all of these qualities of, you know, of Sheila, of Debbie, of Rick, of Kristen, and she's able to incorporate all of these qualities into herself to make herself stronger. And she's finally able to get past her own, like, you know, fears to go into her dreams and take on the biggest monster of them all, the one that's, you know, been running rampant and just killing everybody she loves. So I just think that this scene is just really, it's just really beautiful. It's really touching, showing her finally coming into her own power.
How did it make you feel as a young girl watching that scene? How did it make you feel in terms of kind of, you know, displaying your own power?
Oh, I mean, that's one of the reasons why, even though this movie was, you know, terrifying, obviously, you know, to a young girl, like, you know, I saw this movie, as I said, you know, in the 80s when I was little. But I also loved it. I loved it because of this, you know, this story, because you get to see Alice turning into something that's even greater than herself. I also loved the music in this movie so much. You have a great selection of songs, including Sinead O'Connor's song. Unfortunately, it's during the Roach Motel scene with Debbie, which is, you know, hideously gross, but it's a really empowering song. And then they do play it again at the end, which is lovely. You know, and this is, you know, this is a pre Saturday Night Live Pope incident, Sinead O'Connor song that's really about being strong. And then you also have the beautiful Dramarama song, which, you know, is become synonymous with the movie. Anything when Rick is practicing his karate. I mean, you have all these sort of like very underground, beautiful songs, and that coupled with the imagery of this young woman fighting and really becoming something really special. It influenced me in a wonderful way. So I had a love for this movie, even though I was also terrified by it, because obviously Freddy's, was very scary. He's
Yes.
a scary character. So.
Absolutely. So just a quick fact here, and I didn't realize this until I started reading up on the movie a little bit more, but the film actually grossed $49.4 million at the box office.
Yes.
And it was made on a $6.5 million budget. And until Freddy versus Jason was made, it was the highest grossing film in the franchise.
Right.
And I know we had talked before about, some of the reception and how this film tends to get lost somewhat, just because I think of how fast and furious these films were coming out. I think we talked before, but this part 3 came out in 87. This film came out in 1988, and then part 5 came out in 89. So it was just one after another. And I think this one, for whatever reason, gets lost in the shuffle sometimes. But when I read that, I thought that was really fascinating, remembering that part of the franchise and, how well it did.
Absolutely. I think if I'm not mistaken, that this movie was the highest grossing horror movie of that year, and New Line's highest grossing movie at that point. Might be. I think I'm right on that, actually. Anybody could fact check it and and tweet at us.
That's right.
But yeah, it's the money made with this movie was just, it's just hand over fist. This franchise at this point was just fire, just total fire.
Right.
And just like that dog that peed fire.
I still, with that scene, that is it's one of those scenes where you're like, did I really just see that? Did I see a dog named Jason pee fire? Did I really just see that? And yes, the answer is yes. We saw a dog pee fire.
We saw a dog pee fire. Yeah, I can't stress enough like how many funny parts. I think we talked about this earlier. How many, just sort of like under the radar funny things that funny moments in this movie. I know, Freddy's got the punchlines and the puns and stuff, and this is like I think the first of the series where he really they have him let loose with all of his one-liners. But even in this really tense scene where the Alice and Rick's father comes home drunk and he's berating her for simply serving him a salad for dinner. He says to her, what am I, a rabbit? And then he makes a rabbit face and does the buck teeth, what is going on? What does that have to do with anything? But this is a very funny movie. I think also under the radar. You have to be open to the funniness.
Yes, you have to be have to have a certain sense of humor to be able to get it. And it really is, aside from the one scene that scares the crap out of me, it really is a really good piece of the franchise, and I thought it was really well done. And the numbers the money that it made shows that.
Yeah.
Even though sometimes, for whatever reason, the reviews have not been as great on this one, and honestly, I don't know. I don't know why. Um, I I think it's just a really strong movie. Um, in terms of just overall with the movie, we do our little rating system on here, where we give a movie a certain amount of headstones. So we, go up to five. Um, what's your rating for this film? What would you rate it out of five headstones?
Out of five headstones, wow, there are a few reasons why I'm going to give it a higher number of headstones, probably than most people who review the movie, like you mentioned, who have reviewed it and reviewed it poorly. I know, as you said, I've also seen that, this episode in the Nightmare on Elm Street saga sort of gets, bashed a little bit more, tossed around, probably because it's not as quote unquote serious as the first three. It doesn't have that gravitas. It has like a lot more, it's a lot more playful. But I mean, listen, like, there's the most terrifying scene in the movie where Alice gets sucked into the movie screen and then when she's on the other side of the movie screen sees all of her dead friends standing up in the audience clapping. There's the song by Sinead O'Connor and MC Light. Just the reference to Gatekeepers of Dreams. Like, there's that cameo by one of the producers who plays the teacher, and he's talking about the Gatekeepers of Dreams. There's a million reasons, but what I love, what I love and fear so much about Freddy and these movies is that exist in the realm of dreams. And how often, at that point, how often did we get movies like that? I mean, if I'm sure someone will correct me, but so I think I'm going to go with 4 headstones. I'm going to go with 4
Okay.
because I think, and these ratings are subjective. There's a million reasons, I'm sure people have, for poo-pooing this movie, and I'm sure some of those are legit, but I have a bunch of reasons why I think it's a wonderful movie. So yeah, I'm going to give it 4 headstones. So that's a long answer to your question.
Okay. No, that's okay. And I mean, I always say this with movies. A lot of people are sometimes beholden to how others have reviewed a film.
Mm-hmm.
And while we do have some critics and experts out there that I do value their opinion, when it comes down to it, I'd rather watch a movie myself and form my own opinion. And if you look at this one, like I'm looking on IMDb right now, it has a 5.7 rating out of 10. I think that's extremely low for this film, given everything that you mentioned previously, and just what this movie meant for the franchise. And I mean, you think about it, the amount of money that this film brought in really kind of paved the way for future horror films, because a lot of people didn't see horror films as like a mainstream film. This is kind of like in lack of a better analogy here, like a back alley type of film where people didn't really want to talk about those films out in the mainstream. And this, I mean, films like this that incorporated the MTV kind of vibe to it, it really paved the way for some of the films that we're seeing today. So I do appreciate people reviewing the films, but I think when it comes down to it, we all have our own individual taste. And I think sometimes we miss out on some great films because we allow negative reviews, to keep us away from a film that maybe we would enjoy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree with everything you just said. I totally think that this movie made the franchise and other movies and other horror movies of the 80s more accessible to the general public.
Hmm.
Um, you know, as you said, the financial success of the movie, like, you know, it attests to that. You know, lots of people went to go see this. Lots more went after word of mouth spread, because it was like a good. It's kind of like it kind of reminds me in a way of Child's Play, and I know you talked about that in a previous podcast, where these are like horror movies that are really kind of invite everyone in. Anybody can you know, I can kind of step into this and grab a hold of a piece of horror. You know, it's
Right.
not too terrifying. So yeah, I totally agree. You know, and I'm with you on that. I've been burned so many times by not watching a movie because of, you know, what one critic said or a group of critics said, only to find out years later after watching said movie that, wow, that was a really good movie. I don't know why I listened to the critics.
Hmm.
Yeah. So
Exactly. Exactly. That's why I reviewed Would You Rather, the last episode,
right.
because I stayed away from that movie because I read a review one time. I was like, "Oh, that's cheesy and stupid." And
Mm-hmm.
then I actually watched it, and I said, "Wow, I'm kind of mad at myself for listening to somebody else and not forming my own opinion." So that's when I really started saying, "Okay, from here on out, I'm just going to watch a movie regardless of what the reviews say, and just form my own opinion and just go from there." Um, so yeah, definitely. What? Tell me where you rank Robert Englund in terms of his portrayal of Freddy Krueger among all of the legendary uh, killers and villains and supernatural beings amongst the horror films.
Wow. You know, I am influenced by this movie and its campiness. You know, it does have a certain
Hmm.
amount of camp to it because of his, you know, punchy one-liners and his, you know, his little, like, you know, how he's on the beach and all of a sudden he puts on a pair of Ray-Bans. You know, he kind of adjusts to each scenario. He's helping the girl. He's helping Debbie lift weights at one point. You know, so, you know, before she turns into a roach. Um, so it's hard to rank him amongst, like, you know, some of the other um, you know, mad villains, and 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 nightmarish folk. But you know, I probably put him kind of pretty up there only because, you know, the what scared and still scares me about Freddy is just that he attacks you at your most vulnerable. You know, like,
Yes.
you know, yes, you know, Jason, you know, in essence kills you if you've done something quote unquote wrong or immoral, right? Michael
Hmm.
Myers is just out there to, like, you know, murder just, you know, just any, and kind of like anybody he can get his hands on. But Freddy is just, he's waiting for you and you don't see him. You know, the kids are in this movie and other movies, the kids are walking around, they're doing what they have to do. When they fall asleep, which is something that, you know, human beings cannot avoid doing, when they fall asleep is when he, um, you know, comes to say hello and terrorize you and then kill you. And that to me is just, it's just, you know, I don't know, it can't get much scarier than that. Especially as
Yeah.
somebody, I happen to value my dreams a lot, you know, and all of that is also, it's just, you know, purely psychological, you know, which is, you know, again, some part of our makeup, you know, our subconscious, what we do when we're dreaming. And Freddy's right there. Freddy's representing, you know, all of the bad things, all the most scariest parts of ourselves and the scariest parts of other people. And he's just with his glove and the knives and, you know, and his disgusting visage, you know, I don't know.
Yeah.
He's just, he's. He's nuts. He's nuts, and
Yeah,
it's scary.
yeah, and and I've seen him in so many other films. Um, one of my favorite. This is really one of my favorite roles that he has is in 2001 Maniacs.
Oh, okay. I don't think I've seen that one.
Okay, it's it's kind of a zombie slash cannibalism
Mm-hmm.
type movie. Um, it's set in the South, and it's very offensive, but it's so funny. Um, if you if you have a chance, check it out.
Okay.
It's one of those movies that again that just gets destroyed when you are looking at it in terms of ratings.
Okay.
It People just bury it, and it came out in 2005. Um, and I'm trying to pull up some information here on it because it's one of those movies where you can't you can't go into it thinking that you're going to get um, some serious horror movie that has this, eerie feel to it. It's just a bunch of gore for gore's sake. Um, Extremely funny. Like I said, very offensive in some cases. And just thinking about it, I'm laughing because he plays Mayor Buckman in the movie, and actually the movie has a sequel to it, and Bill Moseley plays that role in the next movie,
Oh, wow.
um,
Okay.
which is pretty cool. And this stuff's not working for me. So, but yeah, 2001 Maniacs came out in 2005. If you have a chance, definitely check it out because it's one of those movies that when you're done watching it, you're like, okay, I just sat through this and watched this movie. I probably won't tell anybody that I watched this movie um, because because they're gonna think something is seriously wrong with me, especially at how much you laugh through it. I mean, I remember watching this movie with one of my roommates, and we just laughed hysterically. Um, and I promise no drugs were involved. It was just a funny movie. And we just laughed and laughed and laughed. And, um, some of the kills were just ridiculous. Um, yeah, it has a 5.3 rating on IMDb. So most people would stay away from it, but it really is a funny movie. So if you don't mind a lot of gore, it does go a little overboard with some of the gore, but it's oh my gosh, it's such a funny movie, and Robert Englund is so hilarious in the movie. Um, he's so offensive and it's so funny. So um, yeah, definitely check it out if you have a
Yeah,
chance.
that sounds fantastic. And anytime horror goes like way over the top, I mean that's just, that's ripe for laughter and for comedy.
Yeah,
So yeah, I'll definitely check that out.
yeah, and then the so if you watch that one and you'd like to follow the saga that is 2001 Maniacs, um, like I said, Bill Moseley is in the sequel, and the sequel is named 2001 Maniacs: Field of Screams.
That's great. That's great.
Yes, so it's and Lynn Shay is actually in both.
Oh, stop it. That's wonderful. Oh, that's great.
Yes, she's actually in both films. Um, and she is a little bit nutty in both of these as well. So, so yeah, it's a good time. It's funny.
Well, that's a cool connection. That it's funny because it wraps back to Elm Street Part 4. Is that what I had read was her brother was a producer on Nightmare on Elm Street Part 4. He's the one who has like the little cameo playing the teacher who's talking about in the classroom, who's talking about the gatekeepers of dreams, and there are positive ones and negative ones, and that's, I forget what his name is, but yeah, his last name is Shay, and I was like, maybe that's Lynn Shay's like relative, but I think it's her brother or cousin or something. So it's
okay,
small horror world.
Yeah, it really is. So tell us a little bit about, we'll kind of shift gears here. Tell us a little bit about what you do at Movie John.
Oh, okay, great. Movie John, for those of you who don't know, is a wonderful and fun and super informative zine that's put out quarterly. It's a physical zine that is put out quarterly. It's out of Philadelphia, and I am a contributing writer. So you can catch my articles on their website, which is moviejawn.com, and that's moviejawn.com, and also in their physical print, which you can subscribe to on the website also. And I've been with them for a few years. They're just a wonderful group of people, all diehard movie people. I mean, it goes beyond just liking movies. I mean, Rosalie Kicks, who is the editor, I mean, we're really good friends. And one of the first things she said to me was something that no one outside of myself has ever said, which is, movies are my friends. And I thought to myself, wow, I have found my way home, because I have always thought of movies as my friends. So these are, a group of writers and artists who are just immensely talented, who give really thoughtful reviews on old movies, new movies, upcoming movies. They also have their own podcast. A lot of exciting things happening actually over at Movie John right now. So I would really urge anybody to head over to the website, and you'll find their podcasts, links to their podcasts, and tons of articles on all kinds of movies. And you definitely want to subscribe to the zine too. It's really fun. You get fun goodies in the mail along with the magazine. It's just a good time.
That's awesome. And yeah, I definitely, I checked out the website, and I'm definitely going to subscribe, and, a lot of good stuff over there, a lot of in-depth analysis of films, which I really enjoy. And, going beyond just this is what happened here, and, this scene was this, it's like, really studying the characters and why certain things happen. It's great. So all of that information we will be putting in the description for this episode, so people can check it out, because it's definitely worth checking it out.
Great. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think so.
No problem. So couple other things that we're going to do before I let you go. What are some movies, and I know we spoke a little bit about this before, but what are some movies that are coming up that you're really, really pumped about?
Oh, the first one that jumps out is Wonder Woman 1984. I am so psyched for this movie. Again, I was an 80s kid, so the trailer just had me hooked. As soon as you hear the New Order song that is, pumping through it, you see, all of the costumes, it's a period piece for the 80s. I'm excited for it. And I loved the first one. Patty Jenkins is an amazing director, so I'm really psyched for that. I'm also incredibly just anxious even for Promising Young Woman. which is coming out in April, hopefully, unless they push it back. It's starring Carey Mulligan, and it just looks like the next best female revenge film. I think that there's going to be a lot more twists in this movie than we can tell by the trailer, but so far so good. The colors in the movie from the trailer, her acting, of course, Carey Mulligan is amazing. I love her. And I can't wait to see her again in her own movie. So I'm really looking forward to that. So anytime a woman is given a movie in which she gets vengeance, I'm pretty much all there. So I expect to see this one multiple times. So yeah.
Gotcha. And what about horror films that you're looking forward to seeing?
Wow, I think you know the answer to this one.
I know.
Oh yeah, Candyman. I cannot wait. I know I sound like a broken record, but I mean, I fell in love with Candyman. I was late to the party. Okay, I came out. I was very well aware of it in the 90s, but I only saw it. I think it was last year or the year before, prompted by a podcast I was listening to where they talked about it, and I was like, oh, let me catch Candyman, and I was just hooked. No pun intended.
I see what you did there. I see what you did.
Didn't mean to, but glad I did. I love that movie. I love Tony Todd. He's amazing. His acting, his dedication, his ferocity, his elegance, how gentle he is. I mean, it's just, he takes that character and shows us so many sides to it. And he hardly says much in the movie at all. I mean, this is all just, what a masterful actor he is.
Yes.
His dedication is incredible. I read up a lot on Cabrini Green, on, what was going on in Chicago during that time, how all of that informed the film. My husband is very much interested in American history and sociology. So he was well aware of Cabrini Green, and we talked about that. It was just a great movie, I think, for so many reasons. The racial relations, all of the issues, folklore, everything. It's just that there's a lot going on in that pot. They're stirring a lot of different, ingredients, and it works. So I am just so psyched, as a huge fan of Monkey Paw Productions, Jordan Peele's production company. I'm a big fan of theirs, so I'm really excited to see. Her name is Nia DaCosta, I think.
Yeah, Nia DaCosta. Yep.
Nia DaCosta's take on Candyman 2020. The trailer looks amazing. It looks like it's been updated for our times in a very well thought out and a clever way. I love that they brought back one of the characters we see in the trailer as a throwback to the original. I'm so psyched I'm definitely going to be there opening night because I just cannot wait.
Yes, and I don't know if people listening, if they know how much of a fan I am of Tony Todd. I normally wouldn't say his name because I do hope one day that he will be a guest on the podcast. I'm going to keep pushing for that. But huge fan of his. But like you said, I'm really looking forward to seeing what Nia DaCosta does as the director of this film. And I wanted to make sure I made a point of that again, to make sure that people know Jordan Peele is one of the producers. He's one of the screenwriters, but he is not the director. Nia DaCosta is. And, as film lovers, it's really great to see new people in that role, to get fresh takes on films. especially one with the story and the mystique that Candyman has. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what she does with the film. Also, want to give a huge shout out in terms of the way that this film is being done this time. Clive Barker was behind the first one, and it, like you said, it's a story that has such strong racial tones to it. And this time around, it's actually being told by the people that look like the ones portrayed in the film.
Absolutely.
And that's such a huge thing. And I know we talked a little bit before about horror noir and that documentary. And if folks haven't seen that yet, if you want a look at African Americans and people of color and how our roles have changed from the beginning of horror films being made to now, go check that out. Shudder, it's on Shudder. You can get a subscription through Amazon Prime Video. I promise you they're not paying me to say this. I watch a lot of the stuff on their channel all the time. Great horror movies on there. I'm not going to say who one of the executive producers is on that documentary because, again, I want her on the podcast one day too, so I'm not going to bombard her. But I want her on the podcast too, and hopefully she's listening so she'll know exactly who she is.
She's an amazing person. I hope
She
she's
is.
listening. She's amazing.
I hope so too. And I hope Mr. Todd is listening. I said his name again. I said I wasn't going to, but I hope he's listening as well because, again, I really want him on the podcast. But, yeah, definitely looking forward to Candyman and what they're going to do with that. Another horror film that I'm looking forward to is Spiral, which is I don't know whether to classify it as a reboot or just a reimagining or just a spinoff of the Saw franchise, but I am really interested in seeing what Chris Rock does in a role like this. Really, really curious to see how he does this. I know that the stories online say that he's a huge fan of the franchise, and this is an idea that he had, and really want to see this film. I'm not sure how you feel about that one. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that one.
Yeah, I have. Well, I'll just put it flat out. Chris Rock will bring me into the movie theater, whatever he does. You know,
Yes.
I love Chris Rock, and when I read that he was, sort of, working his way into the Saw franchise, I was like, what? Because it's horror, and kind of extreme horror. So to think of, our beloved Chris Rock, who's so funny, and working his way into that genre was just like a head spin. I don't know if he's done horror before. If he has, my bad. But I'm excited to see what happens, how all of this adds up, and what goes down. Definitely. I have not seen the Saw movies. Admittedly, a little bit too violent, too gory, just not my cup of tea. But again, if Chris Rock is in it, I'm there. So
yeah. What I will say is this with the Saw franchise: yes, there are some films that are just way over the top in terms of gore. But I was having this conversation with a friend last week. The first Saw film is about as close to perfection for a horror film as you can get.
Wow.
It's just about as close to perfection as you can get, because if you take the elements of the movie, if you take the originality of what why things were happening the way that they are, and then you take a look at the twist. And since you haven't seen it, I'm not going to spoil it for you, because maybe one day you will watch it. But the twist at the end is, I mean, it's like they say, chef's kiss. I mean, it's
Right.
absolutely fantastic. So yeah, I mean, it is a little bit rough at times with the gore, but it's, oh my goodness, what a great movie.
Well, with that kind of endorsement, then I've got to see it. So,
Well,
so I'll definitely check it
out. Listen, you checked out Would You Rather, and I appreciate you doing that. I love to recommend different things and get people's, take on it. I know that I'm a huge fan of that movie and talked about it the way that I did in the last episode. And you actually gave it a watch. So that made me happy that you actually checked it out on my recommendation.
That's wonderful. I mean, listen, this is my thing. If you're a movie person, I think, to hear someone else just profess a love for a film, how could you not go and watch it? I mean, whether you end up liking it or not, okay, that's a separate issue. But like, it's the same thing as I have made this like comparison many times. I love music. I'm a music person. So what always bothers me is when people say, "Oh, I love music," right? Except I don't like X, Y, and Z types of music. Well, and honestly, what I've always heard, and this, I mean, since I was younger, even through today, I've always heard, "Oh, I love music too, except, country music and rap." Those are the two genres, like, types of music that just really get poo-pooed on by so-called music people. And I always say to myself, if you really love music, you love all music. Doesn't mean that you're going to have an extensive collection of country or rap or whatever, or opera, but you find beauty in all of the different types of music because it's music. And I feel the same. I feel the same could be said about movies. You may not be a horror junkie, but there are going to be a few horror movies that you've just that endear themselves to you because of some connection that they have, because they're well made, because of a number of reasons. So, and to meet another movie person, hear them expound on why they love a particular movie, why that movie means so much to them, to me is just, there's no better like recommendation. And of course I want to watch it, if nothing else than just to get myself into that person's, space and say, oh, okay, this has told me a lot. This tells me a lot about that person and who they are, that they would love this movie so much. So yeah, I think it's fascinating to watch movies that other people recommend so strongly.
Yeah, I agree. So as we wrap this up, tell people how they can find you and where to follow you and all that good stuff.
Oh, well, you can find me on Twitter. I've been living there a lot lately. And my handle is at Jessie WHM fan. So that's me on Twitter, and you'll see my little black and white picture. You can always get at me through email, which is booksvhsmusic@gmail.com. And if you have a chance, please search out my articles on MovieJawn, moviejawn.com, and they have a search function, and you can look up any articles that I've written for their online site. You can just look up Jessica or Jessie. It'll bring you to my stuff.
Awesome. And like I said, I'll put all of that information in the description of this episode. And, again, I really want to thank you for, being my guest on here. It really means a lot. And, I just really thank you for letting me chat with you about a movie today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I mean that it's been so much fun. I really like chatting with you. So hopefully we can do it again soon. And thanks for having me. Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, not a problem. So, we're going to keep going forward next time. we will be taking a tour through Camp Crystal Lake with a good friend of mine. I won't spoil who it is yet, but let's just say that me and this guy spend a lot of time talking. And we're going to talk a little bit more about Jason Voorhees and Friday the 13th. So I'm really looking forward to that. After that, the episode after that, I'm actually going to talk about Candyman. So I'm really excited to do a deep dive into that, and not just the first one, but I'll talk a little bit about the sequels as well. I was more of a fan of the original, of the first, but since I'm such a huge fan of He Who Shall Not Be Named, I'm not going to say it again. Since I'm such a fan, I do love and appreciate all of the films, but the first just holds a special place in my heart. And then the episode after that, I'm going to be breaking down the entire Saw franchise with another friend of mine. So I'm really excited about the next several episodes that we have coming up, and the guests that we have coming on. In terms of how you can reach us, we're on Twitter, Movies to Be Murdered By. It's at TO_murdered. Did not come up with that. You can thank Twitter for that handle. Thanks, Twitter. Shout out to you guys. We also have a YouTube channel, Movies to Be Murdered By. And really what we want to do with this podcast is just be interactive and get everyone's feedback. So if you like our episodes, let me know, throw something out there on Twitter, and really want to hear some feedback. We've been getting some really positive traction lately, so I'm really excited about that and where this is all headed. So again, Jessie, thank you. And until next time, folks, this is Jeff Watson, your host of Movies to Be Murdered By, and go enjoy you a very, very nice, scary horror film today, since it's Friday the 13th when this is coming out. So really enjoy the day, and watch you some horror movies. If it's Friday the 13th on, if they have a marathon of that, go watch it. I always do that on every Friday the 13th, so I'm really looking forward to that. But talk to you next time.